When I was 19, I took a summer job in the kind of place you only end up if life pushes you there. A little coal town in West Virginia called Black Hollow. Population, a few hundred at best. One gas station, one diner, one bar, and a cemetery that felt bigger than the town itself. That cemetery was where I'd be spending most of my nights. My uncle pulled some strings to get me the gig. He said it was easy money. Trim the grass, clear fallen branches, repaint the old gates, tidy the paths. The dead don't complain, he told me with a laugh. At first, I believed him. But by the time that summer was over, I wished I'd never set foot inside Red Clay Cemetery. The place was old, older than any graveyard I'd ever seen. Established in the 1800s, back when the mines were booming. It stretched up the side of a hill, row after row of leaning stones and crumbling crosses. Half the names were faded beyond recognition. Some markers weren't stone at all, just wooden posts driven into the earth, worn to splinters by a century of rain. The worst were the blank slabs, cold, featureless headstones like someone had buried folks they wanted forgotten. The ground itself was wrong. The soil in Black Hollow is red clay, soft and damp even in the middle of summer. Graves there never stayed put for long. The earth sagged, sunken spots forming where caskets had collapsed. It always looked like something was shifting just under the surface. The head groundskeeper was an old man named Russell, heavy smoker, gray beard, the kind of guy who didn't say much unless he thought it mattered. On my first week, he gave me the basics: where the mower fuel was, what parts of the grounds the church cared about keeping tidy, and which parts they'd let rot. Then, just before sending me off on my own, he said something that didn't register right away. "Kid," he muttered, tapping the ash off his cigarette, "if you're still here after dark, never look toward the miners' row, and if you hear anything out past midnight, don't answer it. Don't even acknowledge it." I laughed nervously, waiting for the punchline. But Russell wasn't the joking type. His eyes were steady, serious. I asked him what he meant, and he just turned away. "Some things don't stay buried in soft clay," he said. That was it. I figured it was some local superstition, the kind of ghost story talk old folks throw at outsiders. But the warning hung around in the back of my mind like a splinter. 2 weeks later, I learned what he meant. It was a Friday evening, hot and sticky. The mower had broken earlier in the day, so I stayed late trying to fix it. By the time I got the damn thing running, the sun had slipped behind the ridge. I decided to cut the backplots anyway, the ones nobody visited anymore. I kept telling myself it was no big deal, just grass and stones. But once full darkness hit, everything changed. The cemetery went quiet in a way the woods around it didn't. No crickets, no owls, not even the buzz of cicadas. Just silence, heavy and pressing. My phone flashlight barely cut through the dark, and every shadow looked deeper than it should have. I was packing up ready to leave when I heard it. Shovels. The metallic scrape of metal biting into dirt, the dull thud of clay hitting the ground. Slow, steady, methodical. At first I thought it had to be Russell, or maybe some locals pulling a prank. But when I called out, no one answered. The digging didn't stop. It was coming from the far end of the grounds. The place Russell had warned me about. The miners' row. The miners' row was a stretch of graves on the north side, separated by a crumbling stone wall. Most of the men buried there had died in cave-ins and explosions over the years. Some said the row was cursed, that too many bodies had been stacked in the ground without names, without prayers. Folks claimed to hear voices there, even in daylight. I told myself I'd just take a look, prove it was nothing, then leave. But the closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The digging grew louder, more frantic, and then I saw it. One of the graves wasn't right. Earlier that week, I'd passed it while trimming brush. It had been level, the headstone cracked but standing. Now, the earth was torn open, fresh red clay heaped at the sides, and the hole wasn't empty. Something was moving at the bottom. The dirt there rippled, shifting like something underneath was pushing upward. I froze. My mind tried to explain it. Maybe an animal had tunneled through. Maybe loose soil was collapsing. But then I heard it. Whispering. Faint, broken voices rising from the hole, dozens of them layered on top of each other. And beneath the chaos of whispers, one voice pulled free, a voice that chilled me to the bone. It said my name, clear as day. Eli. I stumbled back so hard I dropped my phone. The light went out. In the pitch dark, the whispers grew louder, pressing against my ears. My heart pounded as I scrambled for the phone, hands shaking, dirt under my nails. When the light came back on, the grave looked different. The movement had stopped. The hole was still, but the whispers didn't fade. They were all around me now, echoing between the stones, circling me. I ran. By the time I burst through the gates, I was half sobbing, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached my uncle's trailer. He was sitting on the porch, half asleep with a beer in his hand. When he saw my face, he set it down slow. "What'd you see?" he asked. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, telling him about the grave, the voices, the way it knew my name. My uncle didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes. He just got real quiet. Finally, he said, "Russell warned you, didn't he?" I nodded. My uncle leaned forward, voice low. "Listen, boy, them miners were never put down right. Too many died at once, too many stacked in shallow pits. They weren't given names, or prayers, or peace. You stir that ground, it stirs back. And if it calls you, don't you ever answer." I wanted to argue, tell him it was some trick of my brain, that exhaustion had made me hallucinate. But deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. The fear in his voice wasn't pretend. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard the scrape of shovels, the faint murmur of whispers just under my bed. The next day, I forced myself back to the cemetery. I had to see if what I'd witnessed was real, if the grave was still open, if the dirt still shifted. But when I got there, everything was normal. The grave was sealed, the earth packed flat, grass laid neatly across the top. The headstone had changed, though. That much I know for certain, because carved into the stone, where before there had been only cracks and weathered lines, was a name. Fresh, sharp, clean. It was mine. Eli Carter, 2002. No end date, just a dash waiting to be filled. I stood frozen in front of that headstone, staring at my own name carved into the stone. The dates were wrong. I wasn't dead. But the dash after my birth year felt like a countdown waiting to be finished. My first thought was vandalism. Somebody in town had to be messing with me. Maybe Russell was testing if I'd quit. But the carving was too clean, too deep. I ran my fingers across the grooves. The stone wasn't weathered. It felt newly cut, like someone had etched it in the last 12 hours. I left the cemetery in a daze. That night, I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus. My uncle sat across from me at the table, watching me push food around my plate. Finally, he said, "It started, hasn't it?" I didn't answer, but he knew. "Russell tried to warn you," my uncle muttered. "The ground out there takes more than bodies. It takes names. Once it knows yours, it won't let you be." I wanted to yell at him, ask what the hell he meant, why he hadn't told me all this before, but the look on his face silenced me. It wasn't anger. It was pity. That night, I slept maybe an hour. I woke up to scratching at my window. Not like branches brushing against glass. This was fingernails. Slow, deliberate. When I pulled back the curtain, nothing was there. Just the reflection of my own pale face staring back at me. The next morning, I tried to quit. I told Russell I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't even bring up the headstone. I figured he wouldn't believe me. But when I said I was leaving, he just shook his head like he'd expected it. "You can walk away if you want, kid," he said, "but it won't walk away from you." I pressed him for answers. He lit a cigarette and leaned against his truck, squinting through the smoke. Back when the mines collapsed, they had too many bodies and not enough ground. They buried them fast, stacked like cordwood. Never marked proper. No names, no prayers. Folks say the ground took offense, wouldn't hold still. Every few years, graves shift, headstones move. Some dig their way back up, looking for names to steal. "That's insane," I said, though my voice shook. Believe what you want. But if your name's on a stone, it means the ground claimed you. You're walking on borrowed time. He looked at me, and his eyes weren't mocking. They were tired. Best you can do now, he said quietly, is don't go back after dark. Don't let it see you twice. I tried to take his advice. For the next week, I stayed away from Red Clay Cemetery. I picked up shifts at the gas station in town instead, trying to pretend life was normal. But pretending only lasts so long. Because every night, I dreamed of digging. The sound of shovels breaking clay. The weight of dirt collapsing. And always, always the whispers. Louder now, pressing against my ears, until I woke up gasping for air. The final straw came on a Wednesday. I was driving past the cemetery on my way home when I saw lights inside. Flashlights, moving among the graves. I told myself it was vandals, or maybe kids messing around. Against every instinct, I pulled over. When I crept through the gates, the flashlights were gone. But the earth wasn't still. Dozens of graves along the miners' row were sinking, dirt shifting like something beneath was clawing upward. The air smelled of wet clay and rot, and in the middle of it all was my headstone, the name on it glowing faintly, like the stone itself was breathing. That's when I saw the figure. It stood a few rows down, half in shadow. At first I thought it was Russell, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin, its arms too long. It wasn't holding a flashlight, but the light seemed to bend around it like it was pulling the darkness closer. I couldn't move. The figure tilted its head slowly like it was studying me. Then it lifted one long hand and pointed toward the ground at its feet. I followed the gesture. A new grave was open, freshly dug. Inside was a coffin. The lid was half rotted, splintered. And through the cracks I saw a face. My face. I don't remember running. One moment, I was staring at myself lying dead in that coffin. The next, I was sprinting down the hill, lungs burning, legs numb. I didn't stop until I collapsed on my uncle's porch, screaming. He dragged me inside, locked every door, and forced me to sit down. I told him everything. The graves, the figure, the coffin with my face inside. My uncle didn't interrupt. When I finished, he poured a shot of whiskey and slid it across the table. "You saw your replacement," he said. I asked him what the hell that meant. The ground don't just claim the dead. It builds copies. Hollow things. Fills them with what it takes from you. Your name, your breath, your voice. And when it's ready, it trades. The copy walks free, and you take its place underground. I stared at him, trembling. "You mean it's trying to bury me alive?" He shook his head. "Worse. Alive. Dead. It don't matter. Once the clay has you, you're gone." For the next few nights, I didn't leave the trailer. My uncle kept watch, shotgun across his lap, though I'm not sure a gun would have mattered. But the voices didn't stay in the cemetery. They followed me. I'd hear them in the kitchen, in the bathroom, right outside the window. Always whispering my name, calling me closer. The final night, they stopped whispering. They started begging. "Eli, help us." Over and over, desperate, pleading. The sound of dozens of voices clawing at my skull. I tried to block it out, covering my ears, blasting music. It didn't work. At exactly midnight, the house shook. Not like an earthquake, like something massive was moving under the foundation. My uncle shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of shovels. Hundreds of them. I ran outside before he could stop me. The earth around the trailer was splitting, red clay bursting upward in mounds. And at the edge of the yard, I saw them. Figures climbing out of the ground. Their faces were wrong, stretched, pale, eyes like empty pits. But their mouths moved in unison, whispering my name. Behind them, at the tree line, stood the tall figure, still pointing at the ground, still waiting. I knew then I couldn't run anymore. The cemetery had followed me home, and if I didn't go to it, it was going to take everything else with me. So I walked forward, toward the voices, toward the open grave that was waiting with my name carved on its stone. I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying in my uncle's yard, covered in red clay from head to toe. My uncle was gone. The trailer was empty. His truck still in the drive, doors open. No sign of him. I staggered back to the cemetery, desperate for answers. Every grave was still, every stone silent. Except one. The headstone with my name. The dash had been filled in. The date of death carved sharp and clean. It was yesterday. When I moved to New Orleans, I thought I was chasing music. In a way, I was. But what I ended up chasing, or maybe what ended up chasing me, was something I still can't explain. Something that started in a cemetery and hasn't stopped following me since. I played saxophone. Not great, not famous, just good enough to pick up gigs in the quarter. If you've ever walked down Bourbon Street at night, you know how it is. Music pouring from every doorway, brass bands on the corner, drunk tourists tossing bills into open instrument cases. The city itself hums like an orchestra. It's beautiful. But beauty here has teeth. Every night after playing, I'd walk. The quarter is alive long after the clubs close, and I liked wandering. That's how I first passed St. Adeline's Cemetery. You've seen pictures of New Orleans graveyards. No headstones in neat rows like the Midwest. Here, the dead rise. Coffins are kept in vaults above ground. Whitewashed mausoleums, crammed shoulder to shoulder, crosses leaning over narrow paths. They call them cities of the dead. And St. Adeline's looked exactly like that. An entire city, silent behind iron gates. Most people in town gave it wide berth. Even the tourists preferred St. Louis or Lafayette cemeteries, the famous ones with tours and guides. St. Adeline's wasn't in the brochures. It had no caretaker, no flowers on graves, no signs of the living at all. The first time I walked past it, I heard something I still haven't forgotten. Singing. It was after midnight. The streets were quiet except for a drunk couple stumbling out of a bar down the block. The sound came faint, like a breeze, carrying voices. High voices. Children. They weren't singing jazz or gospel, not even English. It was Latin, drawn-out syllables like old church hymns, soft, almost gentle. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. I thought maybe there was a choir practicing late at a church nearby. But the streets around St. Adeline's were empty. The voices weren't coming from the quarter. They were coming from inside the cemetery. I told myself it was a trick of acoustics, but my body disagreed. Every hair on my neck stood straight. I should have kept walking. Instead, I pressed a hand to the gate. Rusted. Cold. The voices swelled when I touched it, like they wanted me closer. I pushed. The iron creaked open. Inside, the air was heavy, wet, thick with the smell of mildew and moss. My footsteps echoed too loud between the tombs. Even in moonlight, the paths felt darker than they should. The mausoleums rose on either side, white plaster cracked and stained, angels missing arms, names eroded by centuries of storms. The singing drew me deeper. Not beautiful, flat, droning, each note held too long, like they weren't singing for joy but out of obligation. A hymn, stripped of soul. I stopped at one of the larger vaults, its marble door sealed shut with an iron grate. The sound was loudest here. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the gate. That's when I realized something was wrong. The voices weren't echoing from deep inside the tomb. They were pressed right against the stone, as if dozens of mouths whispered inches from me. And then, mid-hymn, they changed. The Latin words dissolved. The voices fused into one, soft and deliberate. They sang my name, over and over. Caleb. Caleb. I jumped back so fast I nearly tripped over a cracked step. My name echoing from a sealed mausoleum was impossible. Nobody in town knew me like that. I hadn't told it to anyone that night. Before I could run, a sound followed. The soft knock of knuckles against stone. 3 times. Slow. Purposeful. I bolted. The next morning, I told myself it was exhaustion. I'd played a 4-hour set, had a few drinks, probably imagined the whole thing. But that night, I dreamt of the mausoleum. I saw tiny hands pressing against the inside of the stone, skin paper pale, nails broken, mouths moving in unison, singing, but their eyes rolled back white, dozens of them, a choir crammed into a tomb too small to hold them. I woke soaked in sweat, the echo of my name still ringing in my ears. I didn't want to go back, but obsession doesn't ask what you want. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself, played my gigs, hung out at the bar with other musicians, but the city seemed to whisper reminders. A child humming on a stoop, a Latin hymn drifting from a church I walked past. Every sound bent back toward that night. Finally, I gave in. I returned to St. Adeline's. This time, I brought my saxophone. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I played for them, they'd reveal what they wanted. Maybe part of me craved their attention. I slipped in after midnight. The cemetery was silent. I sat cross-legged in front of the mausoleum, opened my case, and began to play. A slow tune. Something I'd written myself, low and mournful. The sound echoed off stone walls, hung in the thick, humid air. When I finished, silence. Then, an answer. The voices rose again, not hymns this time. My tune. They copied it exactly, but warped. Notes held too long, breaths rattling, pitch bending wrong. It sounded like a parody of my own song, drained of warmth, hollow. The mausoleum door rattled. Knocks, louder this time, fists pounding in rhythm. And then, I heard footsteps. I spun around. Shadows darted between the tombs. At first, I thought it was kids sneaking in like me. But then one stepped into moonlight. It was the size of a child, yes, but the proportions were off. Limbs too long, elbows bent backward. Its head tilted like it had no bones in its neck. Its face, God, its face. Smooth, no eyes, no mouth, just skin stretched tight. And then its head split down the middle like clay cracking. A mouth opened where no mouth belonged, wide and hollow, and from it came music, my song, warped and broken, but unmistakably mine. I stumbled back, clutching the sax like it was a weapon. More figures slipped from shadows, 12, 24, all child-sized, all faceless until their heads split, all singing. The choir had stepped out of the tomb. I ran through the cemetery, breath tearing at my chest. The gates loomed ahead. I shoved through them, sprinted down the street, and didn't stop until I was in my room, door locked, blinds drawn. But here's the thing. When I opened my sax case to put it away, something was inside that hadn't been there before. A scrap of marble, chipped and sharp. Words etched deep into it. Choir needs one more. And underneath, my name. I didn't sleep after finding that marble shard in my sax case. It wasn't just that the choir knew my name. It was that they'd touched something of mine. Reached inside my case, left me proof. It meant the cemetery wasn't just a place I'd stumbled into. It had already claimed me. I tried to tell myself I imagined it, that someone else had slipped the stone into my case while I wasn't looking. But deep down, I knew better. The next few days, I avoided music. I couldn't pick up the sax without feeling watched. When I walked the quarter, kids seemed to stare at me too long. When I played in bars, I swore I heard a faint echo underneath my notes, as if a second hidden band was playing along, whispering my name through the chords. One night, after a set, I packed up early. My hands shook so badly I could barely put the sax away. A drummer buddy, Marcus, asked if I was okay. I almost told him everything. But how do you explain to someone that a cemetery choir is recruiting you? I laughed it off, said I was tired, but I couldn't leave it there. I needed answers. That night, I went to a bar far from the quarter, a quiet place where locals drank. I asked the bartender, an older woman with gray streaks in her hair, if she knew anything about St. Adeline's. Her face changed immediately. Not anger, fear. She lowered her voice. "Don't go there. That place was shut down for a reason." I pressed her. "Why? What happened?" She glanced around the bar, then leaned in. "Back in the 40s, a flood swept through, opened some of the tombs. They say coffins floated right out. But St. Adeline's..." She hesitated. The coffins were empty. No bodies. Just clothes, just rosaries, just nothing. The church sealed it after that. No burial since. She poured herself a shot, downed it. Locals say the children's choir from the orphanage used to practice there, long ago. The ones that drowned in the flood. But if you hear them singing now, it isn't them. It's what took their place. Her eyes locked on mine. And if they sing your name, you run. Don't ever let them finish the song. I left the bar shaking, but the warning came too late. That night, I woke at exactly 3:03 a.m. My window was open. I hadn't opened it. From the street below came singing, faint, rising, a dozen children's voices weaving together in a hymn. They were singing my tune, the one I'd played at St. Adeline's. I slammed the window shut, covered my ears. But the sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside, crawling through the walls, seeping into my skull. And beneath the melody, the words formed. Soft, drawn out. Caleb, 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 I screamed, hurled the sacks across the room. The case burst open on the floor. Inside, another shard of marble. This one read, Quayer Waits. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to face them. The next night, I went back to St. Adeline's. Not with my sacks this time, just a flashlight and a desperate need to know what they wanted. The cemetery swallowed me whole. The air inside was heavier than before, reeking of wet earth and rot. My light skimmed across angels with broken faces, tomb doors stained with black water lines. The singing began before I reached the mausoleum. Louder this time, urgent. 100 voices blending into one. When I stepped into the courtyard before the vault, they fell silent. The air went dead still. Then the gate rattled, hands pressed through the bars. Tiny hands, dozens of them, pale and bloated, fingernails cracked and clawing at the air. Their whispers overlapped, begging, pleading. Sing, sing. I stumbled back, my heart hammered, but part of me wanted to obey, to give them what they asked. Maybe then they'd let me go. I lifted the sacks to my lips before I even realized I'd brought it. I didn't remember carrying it, but it was in my hands, heavy and cold. I played, and they answered. The mausoleum door cracked open. Just an inch, but enough. A wet gust of air rolled out, thick with the stench of mildew and decay. The singing swelled, echoing through the courtyard. Figures stepped out. Not children, not human. They were pale, skin stretched thin, joints bent wrong. Their faces were smooth until the mouths tore open down the middle, splitting wide like gashes. From those mouths came sound, perfect, flawless hymns, too flawless. No breath between notes. No human imperfection. Just endless, inhuman harmony. They circled me, their heads tilted as one. My flashlight flickered, then died. The only light left was the moon glinting on their wet skin. One stepped closer. It leaned in until the slit of its mouth was inches from my ear. The song dropped to a whisper. Your place is waiting. I ran. I don't even know how I broke free of them. I remember crashing through the gate, sprinting down the empty street, lungs screaming. I didn't stop until I collapsed on my floor, drenched in sweat. But when I looked up, I wasn't in my room. I was back in the cemetery. The tombs loomed above me, the mausoleum door wide open. The choir stood all around, their mouths splitting, voices swelling, and when I looked down, I saw the truth. I wasn't holding my sacks. I was holding a shard of marble, and carved into it my name. Not as Caleb, not as who I was, but as Caleb, choir of St. Adeline's. I woke, or thought I woke, the next morning in my bed. Sunlight poured through the blinds. For a moment, I convinced myself it was just a nightmare. A long, horrible dream. Then I heard it. From outside, faint but unmistakable. Children's voices singing. Not hymns, not my name, but my song, over and over. And when I looked at my saxophone in the corner, the brass was tarnished black, like it had been buried in water for decades. I haven't played a note since, but sometimes late at night, I hear the choir, and each time it's louder. They're not asking anymore. They're practicing, waiting for the day they add one more voice. Mine. When I got the job at the Montana State Veterans Cemetery, I thought it would be quiet work. Peaceful, even. I'd served 8 years in the Army myself, and though I carried more ghosts than medals, I figured keeping watch over the dead might feel like a way of honoring them. The ground stretched across rolling plains on the edge of Helena, rows of identical white headstones, perfectly measured, perfectly aligned, like soldiers standing at attention forever. The first few weeks were routine: mowing, trimming, clearing wreaths after Memorial Day. There was a comfort in the order, in the discipline of the place. Even at night, when the wind pushed cold across the plains, the cemetery felt solemn, not frightening. But then there was Plot 47. That's the grave that changed everything. The first time I noticed it, I was doing a sunrise walk through the grounds, checking for damage after a storm. Most of the stones were damp with dew, glistening pale in the early light. But one stood out. Plot 47. The engraving looked wrong. The name wasn't sharp like the others. It was wet. The letters glistened as if freshly cut, though the stone was decades old. I wiped my hand across it, half expecting paint or moss. My fingers came away clean, but the letters themselves seemed to shift under my touch. The name read, Private Henry Collier, 1944-1968. It caught me because I knew that name. I'd seen it before, but not here. Henry Collier was buried 3 rows down, Plot 92. I'd trimmed grass around his grave a week earlier. His stone was still there. His name shouldn't be here. I shook my head, thinking it was a mistake. Maybe vandalism. But the letters were carved deep, not painted. Whoever had done it would have needed heavy tools, and no one had been on the grounds overnight. I stood there a long time, staring at 2 graves bearing the same name. One where it belonged, one where it didn't. The next morning, Plot 47 had changed again. This time it read, Sergeant William Hayes, 1917-1945. That name I recognized too. A World War II vet buried near the flagpole, killed at Normandy. I checked, and sure enough, his stone was still in place. 2 graves. One name. It kept happening. Every dawn, the name on Plot 47 shifted. Always a veteran. Always someone already buried elsewhere in the cemetery. By the end of the week, I stopped telling myself it was a trick of the light or a prank. I kept track, scribbling names in a notebook. On Monday, it was Hayes. Tuesday, Collier. Wednesday, Ramirez. By Friday, I had 7 names written down, each belonging to men already buried in Helena soil. And every time I touched the stone, the letters felt alive. Warm. I told Russell, the old groundskeeper who'd worked the place 30 years. He got real quiet. Plot 47, he said finally, voice low. I told them to seal it. Told them years ago. They never listened. What's wrong with it? I asked. He didn't answer, just stared out across the headstones, his eyes wet like he was remembering something he didn't want to. Finally, he said, Stay away from it after dark. Don't write the names down. Don't give it more than it already has. That was all he'd say. I tried to take his advice, but I couldn't stop checking. Curiosity ate at me. One dawn, I found the stone bearing a name I hadn't seen before. Captain James Halverson, 1972. No end date. The man wasn't dead yet. I froze, breath caught in my throat. James Halverson was alive. He owned the feed store on Main Street. I'd bought dog food from him a week earlier. He'd shaken my hand, asked about my service. Now his name was carved in granite, waiting for a death date. I drove straight into town. Sure enough, Halverson was at the store, alive, stacking bags of grain. When I asked if he was okay, he looked at me funny, said he was fine. But my stomach twisted. Plot 47 wasn't copying dead men anymore. It was moving on to the living. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Halverson's name in the stone, that blank dash waiting. I drank, trying to drown it out, but when I closed my eyes, I heard it, the faint sound of a bugle. Taps. Slow, mournful, echoing from nowhere. I sat up in bed, shaking. The sound didn't stop. It carried through the night until dawn. When I stumbled back to the cemetery the next morning, I already knew where it would be. Plot 47. And there it was. Halverson's name. This time complete. Captain James Halverson, 1972, 2023. The night I'd heard the bugle, he died. I drove to town in a panic. The feed store was closed, the lights off. A handwritten sign in the window, closed due to family loss. I checked the obituaries later. James Halverson died suddenly in his sleep. The stone hadn't predicted his death. It had recorded it. I should have quit then, walked away, but I couldn't. I was obsessed. Every dawn I checked Plot 47, and every dawn it bore a new name. Some were already dead, some were alive but wouldn't be for long. And then, one morning, I froze. My blood ran cold, because the name on Plot 47 was mine. Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, 1986. No end date, just the dash, waiting. I stood in front of the stone, my breath fogging in the cold dawn air, staring at my own name carved into the granite. Staff Sergeant Daniel Cole, 1986. No death date yet. Just a dash, like a trigger waiting to be pulled. I touched the letters, hoping they'd smear like chalk, but they were carved deep, permanent. My legs went weak. For the first time since Afghanistan, I felt the raw panic of knowing my life wasn't in my own hands. That day, I couldn't focus. I skipped meals, skipped work, sat in my truck outside the cemetery gates, watching the rows of stones shimmer in the heat. Every time I blinked, I saw the bugle player from my nightmares silhouetted against the horizon. I went to Russell. He looked worse than usual, his skin gray, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. "You saw your name, didn't you?" he said, without me speaking. I nodded. He exhaled smoke slow, like he'd been waiting for this. Plot 47 doesn't mark the dead. It chooses them. Been doing it longer than anyone remembers. I've seen a dozen names carved there before their time. Every one of them died. Every one. How long do I have? My voice cracked. He shook his head. Depends. Some weeks, some days. Sometimes the stone fills the date in before the sun sets. Can't we smash it? Tear it out. Russell's eyes went wide, almost terrified. Don't even think it. I tried once. Back in '89, took a sledgehammer to it. Next morning, my brother's name was on it. 2 days later, he hung himself in his garage. You can't fight it. Best you can do is pray it waits. I left him, hollow inside. That night, the bugle came again. Clearer this time, not faint but loud, echoing across the plains. The notes of taps cut through the walls of my house. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't outside. It was inside me. And then came the salutes. Through the window, in the moonlit yard, I saw them. Rows of figures in uniform. Pale, blurred, but standing at attention. Their hands rose as one, saluting my house, saluting me. I screamed until my throat tore, but they didn't move. Didn't fade, just saluted. By dawn, they were gone. I drove straight to the cemetery. My stone still bore my name. But now the dash had grown darker, longer, like the stone was impatient. Over the next days, things unraveled fast. People in town stopped recognizing me. At the diner, the waitress I'd seen every morning for months stared blankly when I ordered. "Do I know you?" she asked. At the post office, my P.O. box was gone. My license number didn't register on the clerk's screen. When I called my sister in Billings, she hung up, confused, swearing she didn't have a brother. It was like I was being erased, not just from the future, but from the past. And the whole time, Plot 47 waited. The night before it ended, I drank myself sick, sat on my porch with a rifle across my knees, though I knew bullets wouldn't matter against stone. The bugle came, louder than ever, rattling my bones. When I staggered outside, the cemetery glowed on the horizon, a pale light rising from the rows of headstones, pulsing with the rhythm of the song. Drawn like a moth, I walked. Past the gates, past the flagpole, straight to Plot 47. The stone shone faintly, wet with dew though no rain had fallen. The letters of my name writhed like they were being cut as I watched. And then, in front of the stone, figures appeared. Soldiers. Not whole, not alive. Shadows in uniform. Helmets, rifles, boots. Faces gone. They stood in formation, silent, waiting. One stepped forward. His uniform was tattered, chest caved in, but his salute was perfect. He lowered his hand and pointed to the ground at my feet. The earth shifted. A grave opened. Inside was a casket. The lid splintered, cracked. And through the gap, I saw my own face, eyes closed, skin pale. I dropped to my knees. My body trembled as the bugle hit its final note. The date etched itself into the stone. 1986, 2023. I don't remember dying. I remember waking. I was standing in line, uniform pressed, boots polished. The soldiers around me straightened as the bugle began again. My rifle was heavy in my hands. My salute rose without thought. When I looked across the rows of graves, I saw the living groundskeeper, some new kid I didn't recognize, walking his morning patrol. He stopped at plot 47, confusion on his face as he read the stone. It didn't bear my name anymore. It bore his. Most people in Maine will tell you that winter doesn't scare them. It's part of life here. You shovel your walk, you salt the steps, you keep the wood stove burning, and you deal with it. But there's winter. And then there are the nights that don't feel like weather anymore. The nights when the snow falls so thick and heavy it feels alive, like it has weight and hunger. Nights where the wind doesn't howl, it whispers. I learned that the night I took the plow down Frost Hollow Road. I'd been working for the county for 6 years, plowing the back routes nobody else wanted. That winter was the worst I'd ever seen. Snow stacking 6 feet high in some places. Roads iced over so slick they ate chains like candy. Most nights were just brutal, back-breaking work. But that night was something else. By midnight, the storm had turned biblical. My plow headlights carved maybe 10 feet of visibility, the rest just a wall of white. The wipers screeched like they were ready to tear off. I kept the radio on low to keep my nerves steady, but even the static felt strange, like voices buried in it. The dispatcher had warned me. Avoid Frost Hollow if you can. Drift problems, low visibility, black ice. I told him, yeah, sure. But when I reached the fork, the main highway was blocked solid. Drifts higher than the hood, no way through. My only option was the detour, the old road that cut past the cemetery. Frost Hollow Cemetery. It was older than the town itself. Locals said the first graves were dug before Maine was even a state. Back when winters froze the ground so hard, you could bury bodies in the permafrost like sealing jars. They only used it in the coldest seasons when the earth was hard enough to keep the dead in place. I'd heard the stories at the diner from old-timers, about how the snow there never melted, even in July, about how, if you stood still long enough, you could hear the ground breathing under the drifts. I laughed with the rest of them when they told it, but none of them ever made eye contact when they did. I turned the plow onto Frost Hollow Road and instantly regretted it. The woods closed in tight, pines bowing under the weight of snow, branches scraping across my cab. The road narrowed, banks rising like white walls on either side. My headlights lit the cemetery gates up ahead, iron bars half buried in snow, twisted and rusted, leaning like broken ribs. And then I saw them. Footprints, not animal tracks. Bare human footprints, pressed deep into the powder, leading straight off the road and through the gates. I slowed, heart pounding. Who the hell would be walking barefoot in a blizzard? I crept forward, plow grinding. My lights swept across rows of stones jutting out like crooked teeth. The footprints wound between them, disappearing into a mound of snow piled high over a grave. And the mound moved. Not much. Just an inch. Like the snow itself rose and fell, slow and deliberate, like breathing. I killed the engine without thinking. The storm muffled instantly, silence pressing in so heavy my ears rang. And in that silence, I swear I heard it. Breathing. Wet. Slow. From beneath the snow. My chest tightened. I wanted to drive, to gun the engine and get the hell out. But something pulled me forward. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled my jacket tighter, and stepped out into the storm. The cold hit like knives, burning my lungs with every breath. I trudged toward the mound, boots crunching. The footprints were sharp, fresh. Whoever left them had been minutes ahead of me. I reached the grave, brushed snow off the headstone. The ice crust cracked away, revealing a name. Eleanor Briggs, 1911-1936. The snow rose and fell, again, and then it cracked. A fissure split across the mound, letting out a sound I'll never forget. A groan. Low, muffled, like wood splitting underground. I staggered back, beam shaking in my hand. My light swept the cemetery, catching more mounds. Dozens. Each one shifting under the drifts. Some slow, some faster, breathing in rhythm. I bolted for the truck, slipping on ice, fumbling with the handle. I slammed the door, jammed the key, fired the engine. The plow roared back to life. But the sound didn't drown out the groans, because now they were everywhere, all around me, beneath me. The ground was breathing. I floored it, plow blades scraping, snow spraying high. The truck fish-tailed but caught traction, barreling down the road. My chest heaved, my hands locked white around the wheel. That's when the windshield frosted from the inside. Not fog, frost. It spread in branching veins across the glass, cracking patterns that pulsed like veins. I hit the defroster. Nothing. I scraped with my glove. Nothing. And then words began to form. First scratches, then letters, then a phrase etched in ice so sharp it looked carved. Turn back. I blinked. The words melted, then reformed. This time, it was my name. Daniel. I screamed, pounded the dash. The truck jolted, headlights catching something ahead. Figures. For a split second, I thought it was people. Men, standing in the storm. But no. Too stiff. Too pale. Bodies, half buried in snow, upright. Their faces frozen white, eyes wide open. And as I passed, their heads turned. Every one of them. Turning in perfect unison to follow me. By the time I hit the far end of Frost Hollow Road, my mind was unraveling. I didn't remember the drive back to the garage. The guys on shift said I looked like I'd crawled out of the snowbank myself. Blue lips, beard crusted in ice, jacket soaked through. They asked if I got stuck. I just shook my head. I couldn't tell them. Not about the breathing graves. Not about the frost spelling my name. Not about the frozen faces watching me pass. But I knew it wasn't over. That night, back in my apartment, the storm outside finally stopped. The silence was worse. I tried to sleep, but every time I shut my eyes, I felt it. The weight of snow pressing down, the suffocating rise and fall of lungs beneath ice. At 3:07 a.m., I woke up choking. My room was freezing. My breath fogged the air. And on the inside of my bedroom window, frost had formed words. Your place is waiting. Underneath, a number. Plot 14. When I saw the frost on my bedroom window, I thought I'd lost my mind. I scraped at the glass until my fingers bled, but the word stayed. I tried to convince myself it was a dream. Maybe I never left the cemetery. Maybe I froze to death out there, and this was the moment my brain finally shut down. But when the sun came up, the words were gone. My apartment was warm again, and I was still breathing. I should have packed a bag and left Maine, driven until the gas tank ran dry. But where would I go? You can't outrun the snow, not when it already knows your name. That evening, I showed up for shift early. Russell, the oldest driver on the crew, was smoking out back. He gave me a look like he already knew. You took Frost Hollow Road, didn't you? I didn't answer. He sighed, flicked his cigarette into the snow. They'll find you now. Doesn't matter where you hide. That place doesn't like being disturbed. What the hell is it, Russell? What's in that cemetery? He stared past me, eyes wet and red, like he hadn't slept in years. Not what. Who? They bury 'em in winter, so the ground's too hard to settle. But snow doesn't hold the dead. It moves, shifts, breathes. Every few decades, it chooses more to keep it company. If it's written your name, you're already halfway underground. I didn't plow that night. Didn't even try. I sat in my truck in the garage bay shaking, staring at the snow piling outside. By midnight, the storm was back. Heavier than before. The walls rattled, snow pelted the roof like gravel. The other guys headed out in pairs. I stayed. I couldn't face Frost Hollow again. But I didn't have to. Because the storm came to me. The garage lights flickered, then died. The storm swallowed everything. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the bay. Snow was coming in under the doors, not drifting, pushing. Curls of white poured inside like fingers reaching. Then came the sound. Not the wind, not the plow engines, breathing. The same slow, wet rhythm I'd heard under the graves. Filling the bay, filling me. I backed toward the truck, heart slamming. My beam caught shapes moving across the concrete. Not snowdrifts, not shadows, figures. Half-buried bodies dragging themselves sideways across the floor, snow clinging to them, eyes frozen wide. Their mouths didn't move, but their chests rose and fell in unison with the storm. Breathing, always breathing. I bolted into the cab, slammed the door, twisted the key. The truck roared to life, but the windshield frosted instantly. Veins of ice branching out until the glass was opaque. Words formed again. Tonight. Then, underneath. Plot 14. The blade dropped on its own, metal shrieking across concrete. The truck lurched forward like something was pushing it. The garage door crumpled open, and the storm swallowed me whole. I don't remember steering. The plow cut through drifts like paper, headlights blinding white. The road bent without me turning. The truck was driving itself, and I knew where it was going. Back to Frost Hollow. The gates yawned open like they'd been waiting. Snow poured inward in waves, bearing the stones to their shoulders. My truck lurched down the central path until it screeched to a stop at a fresh mound. The headstone was already carved. Daniel Cole, 1986, 2023. I screamed, slammed the shifter into reverse. The tires spun useless in the snow. The storm pressed in, suffocating, the cab rattling like it would implode. And then the ground opened. The mound split down the middle, coughing out a blast of ice-cold air that stank of soil and rot. Arms shot out, pale, frozen, clawing. They grabbed the plow, the tires, the doors. The truck tilted, groaning, as if dragged by something under the snow. My window shattered inward, spraying ice. A hand shot through, stiff fingers locking around my throat. I don't remember fighting. I remember falling. The cold swallowing me. The weight of snow pressing down, crushing my ribs, choking me. I opened my mouth to scream, and snow poured in, packed into my lungs, but instead of suffocating, I breathed it. My chest rose, fell, in rhythm with the storm, and in that moment, I understood. The cemetery wasn't full of the dead. It was full of the living, buried alive, forced to breathe forever in the dark, feeding the storm, keeping it alive. I was one of them now. I don't know how much time passed. Minutes, hours, years. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my truck. I wasn't in my bed. I was standing, upright, half buried in a snowdrift among rows of others, faces pale, eyes wide, breath rising in clouds we didn't control. I tried to move, couldn't. Tried to scream, only frost spilled from my mouth. And then I saw it. A fresh set of footprints, leading into the cemetery. A figure trudging through the snow, flashlight trembling. Another plow driver caught in the storm. The mound beside me shifted, breathing faster. My own chest rose and fell in perfect time. And on the inside of his windshield, when his headlights cut across it, words frosted into view. Your place is waiting. Plot 15. In most places, cemeteries look cared for. Grass trimmed, flowers fresh, stones polished. They're places where the living visit the dead. But in the desert, cemeteries don't look like that. Out here, they don't look like the dead are resting at all. They look like the desert never wanted them in the first place. Cracked earth, splintered crosses, headstones bleached bone white under the sun, and a wind that never seems to leave the place alone. The one outside Winslow was called the Bone Orchard. I'd heard of it long before I ever saw it. When you're a grad student in geology, you end up in all kinds of small towns chasing soil samples and fault lines. And Winslow was one of those places for me. I used to eat breakfast at a diner on the edge of town, and that's where I heard the stories. Old men hunched over coffee would whisper about the Bone Orchard, how bones didn't stay buried out there, how the ground shifted at night like something was crawling just under the surface. Kids dared each other to climb the fence and spend a night, but no one ever admitted they'd made it till morning. One rancher swore his cousin had gone missing out there, said he'd found the man's hat lying in the sand at the gates, but no footprints leading out. Just in. I laughed it off like everyone else did. But the old-timers never smiled when they told it. The first time I passed the cemetery was during daylight, and even then it didn't sit right with me. The fence leaned inward like a rib cage. Bars bowed, as if something inside had pressed too long against them. Most of the stones tilted crooked in the clay, a few cracked clean in half. Plastic flowers stuck in the dirt had bleached white until they looked more like bone than petals. I drove past quick, told myself cemeteries don't scare me. I'd been in plenty for surveys. Most were just land with names carved in stone. But this one looked like it was waiting. Weeks later, I was out past midnight in the desert, finishing up a run of fieldwork. My thesis deadline was eating me alive, so I stayed out later and later, mapping strata by flashlight, jotting soil data until my hand cramped. When I finally packed up, the truck's gas needle was hugging empty. The quickest way back cut right past the Bone Orchard. The desert at night is a different world. No sound, no light but the moon. My headlights carved a tunnel through emptiness. My radio spat static, and at one point I thought I heard something buried in it, like teeth clicking together. I shut it off fast. When the fence appeared in the beams, my gut twisted. The gates leaned open just enough to look like an invitation. I should have kept driving. But curiosity's always been my worst habit. I pulled over. The engine ticked as it cooled. The air should have been warm. It was August. But the second my boots hit dirt, the ground bit cold. Not just chilly. Cold, like standing on stone pulled from a freezer. I told myself it was nothing, just desert air playing tricks. I grabbed my flashlight and walked toward the gates. They groaned when I pushed them open, loud enough to echo across the sand. Inside, the markers stood in uneven rows. Some limestone, edges eaten by decades of wind. Some were nothing more than painted rocks. Others were wood so dry and splintered they looked ready to collapse. The sand between them wasn't flat. It bulged in places, sagged in others like something had rolled beneath it. I shined the beam across names. Most were too weathered to read. One stone had two names carved on top of each other, like the living had forgotten who lay there. Another had no name at all, just a cross etched with deep gouges like claw marks. That's when I heard it. A rattle. I froze. My first thought was rattlesnake, but I know that sound too well. This wasn't sharp. It was deeper, slower, like something knocking bone against bone. The sound circled me, left, right, behind. My beam shook across stones. Nothing moved. The desert was windless, silent. Then the ground shifted, not settling, pushing upward. I stumbled back as the sand cracked. Skeletal fingers pushed through, white and twitching, scrabbling for air. The fissure widened. An arm clawed free. Then a skull, jaw half-rotted, teeth clicking like castanets. It didn't climb skyward. It reached sideways, toward me. My breath tore out in white clouds. I spun, and that's when I saw the others. Mounds swelling, sand splitting, ribs arching, vertebrae rolling loose across the ground. The rattle grew louder until it buzzed in my teeth. I ran. Boots slipped. Beams swung wild. Behind me, bones clattered together, pulling into shapes. Not full skeletons, just heaps dragging themselves closer. I reached the fence, clutching the bars, chest hammering. Behind me, silence fell. I turned. One skeleton was standing. It stood at the base of a tall stone cross, spine bent, one arm hanging loose, its skull tilted toward me. The jaw opened, not to scream, to spill. Dust poured out, not sand, not dirt. Finer, white, powdered bone. The stream hissed as it hit the ground, curling upward in the moonlight. The dust twisted until it shaped a crude face. My face. Empty sockets staring where my eyes should have been. Then it collapsed into grit. I bolted, dove into the truck, slammed the door, floored the gas. The tank coughed fumes but carried me. I didn't look back until the fence was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, lights on, every shadow looking wrong. When I closed my eyes, I saw my own face in dust. I swore I wouldn't go back, but obsession eats deeper than fear. The next evening, just before dusk, I was back at the gates. The cemetery looked untouched. Sand flat. My footprints gone. I walked to the cross, beam shaking. The ground was smooth, no fissure, no dust. I turned to leave. That's when I saw it. An open grave. Inside lay a corpse. Skin. Leathery. Lips peeled back. Sockets hollow. Its head tilted toward me. And then its arms moved, not reaching to climb out, reaching to mirror me. When I stepped back, it stepped back. When I raised my hand, it raised its hand. Every move I made, it copied, until I stopped. Then it kept going, slowly, surely, climbing out. I froze as the thing pulled itself higher, ribs scraping the edge of the grave. Its movements weren't random or clumsy like bones should have been. They were precise, mimicking the way I shifted my weight, the way my shoulders trembled. It was me, my reflection in rotted flesh. I stumbled back, shaking my head, whispering to myself that I was imagining it. But when I dropped my flashlight, its beam skittered across the sand, and the corpse bent too, mirroring the fall, even before I'd crouched to grab it. It wasn't following anymore. It was leading. I backed toward the gates, breath tearing in my throat. The rattle rose again, not from the grave, but from under the entire cemetery. Bones shifting, clattering, rearranging in the dark. I pressed against the bars, but the iron felt hot, too hot to grip. My palms blistered as I tried to climb, and then the wind picked up. Not a breeze. A shriek. It carried dust across the stones, swirling until faces formed in the grit, dozens of them, mouths opening and closing like they were trying to scream, but no sound came out. The faces broke apart, sand slashing my cheeks. When I looked back, the corpse had climbed out. It stood upright now, bare feet sinking into the sand, head tilted, watching me. Then it smiled, not wide, just enough to show it could. I bolted for the truck, threw myself into the cab, turned the key. The engine coughed but didn't catch. I slammed the wheel, begged it to start. When it finally roared to life, the windshield frosted from the inside. Not white, not opaque. Etched. Lines carved across the glass, jagged like bone scratches. At first it looked like random marks, then letters, then words. You're not yourself. I shoved the shifter into reverse, tires spinning. The headlights caught the figure standing in the road. It was me, or something wearing me. The same jacket, same boots, same terrified face. It raised its hand. I felt my arm lift against my will, mirroring it. I screamed, forced my muscles down, but they fought me, jerking upward again like I was a puppet on strings. I swerved hard, clipping the fence. The figure vanished in the lights. I tore out of there, engine howling, not stopping until I hit Winslow. But Winslow wasn't right anymore. The gas station clerk looked at me blank when I asked for fuel. "Didn't I just sell you gas an hour ago?" she asked. I told her no. She frowned. "You sure? Same truck, same jacket." At the diner, the waitress squinted at me. "Back already?" she said. "You just left. Didn't even finish your pie." My hands shook so bad I dropped my coffee. I hadn't been here, but something had. I holed up in my apartment that night, shades drawn, lights on. My body didn't feel like my own. Every time I moved, there was a half-second delay, like something inside me was adjusting, sinking. When I looked in the mirror, my reflection twitched a beat too late. At 2:00 a.m., I woke on the floor, mouth full of grit. My bed was untouched, my boots were on, my jacket zipped. I don't remember putting them on. The mirror in the bathroom had fogged, though the air was dry. On it, traced in dust, were words, "You are wearing me." The next day, no one recognized me. The diner waitress smiled politely like I was a stranger. The gas clerk asked for ID twice, squinting like the face didn't match. My professor called about my thesis, but halfway through she paused and asked who she was speaking to. I shouted my name, shouted until my throat tore, but she hung up. When I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't see my face anymore. Not exactly. My features were thinner, drier, stretched like skin left in the sun too long. My eyes were sinking. And when I smiled, it wasn't me smiling back. I told myself I could fight it, that I could go back to the cemetery, find the corpse, stop whatever was happening. I drove there at dusk. The gates were open wider this time. Inside, the sand looked freshly disturbed, like dozens of bodies had rolled under the surface. At the center stood the figure. Me, whole, solid, breathing easy. It waved. A slow, casual wave. Then it turned and walked into the desert. I tried to chase, but my legs buckled. My knees sank into the sand. Beneath me, something moved, hands clutching, bones shifting, pulling me down grain by grain. The last thing I saw before the sand swallowed me was my own figure climbing the ridge, shoulders straight, stride steady. It glanced back once, smiled, then kept walking. I woke in the dark, not in my bed, not in my truck. I was standing, upright, my arms stiff at my sides, my vision blurred through sockets that weren't mine. I tried to scream, but only a dry rattle came out. My jaw clicked against bone. Around me, others stirred, skeletons, corpses, all upright in the sand, shifting, rattling, waiting. And in the distance, under moonlight, I saw myself, my body, driving my truck back toward Winslow. It was wearing me, and I was nothing but bones left behind. Cemeteries are supposed to be final. That's the comfort people cling to. That once you put someone in the ground, they stay there. But in Louisiana, the ground has its own ideas. The water line creeps higher every year, and it doesn't respect fences or gravestones. The swamp takes what it wants, and sometimes it gives it back. There's a cemetery out past the parish line called the Drowned Acres. You won't find it on a map, but if you spend enough time in the bayous, you'll hear about it. Nobody visits, not even the families with kin buried there. They say the water doesn't let the dead rest. I first heard about it in a roadside diner on Route 190. Our survey crew had been working 12-hour days measuring soil saturation before hurricane season, and we were half dead ourselves, slumped over chipped plates of eggs and grits. The air smelled like burnt coffee and fryer grease. Ceiling fans turned slow, pushing heat from one end of the room to the other without relief. 2 old men sat at the counter, voices low. I wouldn't have noticed them if not for the words, "another one floatin'." The thinner one stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the black swirl. "Storm last night brought 3 more up," he said. The heavier man grunted. "Where at?" "The acres." The other man's jaw tightened. "Jesus. Every damn time." They went quiet. The waitress shuffled past with a pot, top-offing cups. She glanced my way, and her face had that tight don't-you-dare-ask look. But I was younger then. Stupid. Curious. I leaned over to my buddy, smirking. "What?" "Coffin's floating. Sounds like ghost story bull." The men heard me. Both turned at once, eyes sharp despite the years. The heavy one rasped. "Boy, you don't laugh about the acres. That swamp don't keep the dead. It just borrows them." I chuckled, but my stomach tightened. The thinner man leaned closer, voice a whisper now. "You go out there, you'll come back coughing water, if you come back at all." The waitress slammed my plate down hard enough to splatter yolk. "Eat your food," she snapped. Forget you heard it. But I couldn't. A week later, the legend came back to bite me. We were deep in the swamp, charting water lines around the parish. The humidity pressed against my lungs like wet cotton, and mosquitoes swarmed so thick they looked like smoke when you waved your hand. Dragonflies hovered over stagnant pools. The air stank of algae and rot, sweet and spoiled all at once. Our supervisor split us into pairs, but we were short that day, so I drew the short straw and hiked alone, east toward the cypress groves. My boots sank into mud with each step, suction popping when I pulled free. Sweat ran down my back, soaking my collar. I followed the map until the trees opened into a clearing, and that's when I saw them. Headstones, dozens. Some leaning sideways, some nearly swallowed whole by the black water. Wooden crosses, half-rotted marble slabs slimy with moss. Names blurred into nothing, letters eaten by mold. A bouquet of plastic roses floated nearby, colors bleached white by sun and time. And then I noticed the movement. The surface of the water swelled, sank, swelled again, slow, steady, like lungs pulling air. I crouched, heart hammering. The swamp was dead quiet. No frogs, no cicadas. Even the mosquitoes had gone. My own breath sounded too loud. Then I heard it, a gurgle, wet, bubbling, human. At first I thought maybe a gator had taken a turtle under, or some big fish gulped air, but then the water just feet from the nearest stone split open. A hand broke the surface, bloated, wrinkled, skin pale and soft, nails blue. It clawed once, weak, then slipped back under. I staggered back. My beam swept left, right, across the swamp. Ripples spread in every direction. Another hand rose, then an arm, then a face, gray, swollen, lips split wide, eyes bulging. The mouth opened, and black water poured out, gushing down its chest as it coughed, gagged, gasped for air it would never get. It sank again without a ripple, and then the water all around me erupted. Hands, faces, dozens, gasping, choking, mouths stretching wide, eyes bulging, arms clawing for air, children, women, men, some with hair drifting in strings, some with bones poking through split skin, all of them caught in the moment of drowning, reliving it over and over. I wanted to scream, but my chest locked up, my throat closed, no air came. I dropped to my knees, gagging. My stomach lurched, and black swamp water poured out of my mouth onto the mud. Bitter, algae thick, burning my nose. My lungs convulsed as though they were filling. My hands clawed the dirt, nails tearing in panic. When I lifted my head, choking, I saw a coffin drifting in the shallows. Small, too small. The lid had cracked, and inside a child's skeleton floated. Its skull tilted, hollow socket staring straight at me. I ran. God, I ran like the swamp itself was trying to pull me under. Branches whipped my face, mud clung to my boots, mosquitoes swarmed my ears. Every splash behind me sounded like footsteps. Every cough felt like it was in my own chest. I didn't stop until I burst through the tree line and saw the glow of our survey lights. The others laughed when I stumbled back, soaked and wide-eyed. I muttered about hitting a bad patch of ground, about getting spooked by gators. I said nothing about coffins or corpses that wouldn't stay down. That night in the motel, I cranked the shower to hot, steam filling the room. I scrubbed my arms until they were raw, trying to wash the swamp off me. I leaned against the tile, eyes closed, letting the water hammer my back. Then my chest seized. I doubled over, coughing. Black swamp water spilled from my mouth, splattering the porcelain, swirling into the drain. I froze. My lungs burned, but no water had gone in. None. I straightened, trembling, and looked into the mirror. It was fogged from the steam, but my reflection was clear enough, and its lips moved a second after mine. It whispered my name. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the stiff motel mattress with every light on, sheets twisted around me, staring at the ceiling, while my chest rose and fell too shallow, too fast. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt it again, the choking weight of water forcing itself into my lungs, the taste of rot flooding my mouth. When I turned over, the pillow was damp. My throat was raw. I couldn't tell if I'd been coughing in my sleep or if the swamp was still in me. By morning, my coworkers noticed. I looked pale, trembling, lips dry like I'd run miles. I told them I'd had food poisoning. No one believed me, but no one cared enough to ask further. We had too much work to do. All day, I couldn't stop touching my chest, pressing against my ribs like I could feel the swamp water shifting inside me. Each time I bent over to jot a note or mark a map, I caught a whiff of algae. Green, sour, sweet. My hands smelled of it too, though I'd scrubbed them until the skin peeled. That night, I decided not to risk sleep. I sat at the tiny motel desk, a lamp buzzing overhead, eyes burning. I tried reading old notes from class, anything to distract me. But around 2 a.m, I heard something. A drip. I looked toward the bathroom. The shower was off, the sink dry. Still, the sound came steady. Drip. 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 I stood, heart hammering, and stepped closer. The sound was muffled, not on the tile, but inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the sheetrock. A wet gurgle echoed back. I backed away. Then I heard coughing, not mine. From the room next door, a man gagged, hacked, choked. I froze as it rose to screams. Wet, drowning screams, and then silence. I didn't wait. I threw on my boots and stumbled outside, night air sticking to my skin. The motel was quiet, rooms dark. But one door down, water seeped out from beneath the frame, black and glistening under the moonlight. I ran. The next morning, the crew was buzzing. Someone had died in the motel overnight. Heart attack, they said, or maybe a seizure. But I knew better. I heard it. When we loaded the trucks, I asked if anyone had ever heard of the acres. A couple of the older guys went stiff, muttering about bad ground and families moving their kin years ago. My supervisor cut in fast. Forget about that place. Doesn't concern us. But it did concern me, because every breath I took felt heavier, wetter, like the swamp was moving closer each day. That evening I drove alone. The sun bled out behind the trees, turning the swamp into black water and silver light. I followed a dirt track until it thinned into reeds, then parked and walked, mud sucking at my boots. Cicadas screamed, then cut off as if swallowed. When the cypress opened, I saw it again. The cemetery. The drowned acres. Headstones leaned sideways, crosses, splintered, marble cracked and green with slime. Coffins bobbed in the shallows, lids warped, wood swollen. I swear one lid pulsed, rising and falling like something inside was still breathing. I knelt, forcing myself to stay calm. My flashlight beam swept the graves. The water was still. No hands, no faces. For a moment, I thought maybe it had been some heat stroke hallucination the first time. Then I heard it, coughing. Behind me, I spun. Nothing, just reeds swaying. Then it came again, closer, wet, gurgling. My own throat convulsed in sympathy. The water in front of me bubbled. A body rose. It wasn't like the others. This one stood, shoulders straight, dripping black water. Its face was gray, lips torn, eyes hollow. And yet, it was me. My jacket, my boots, my same wide-eyed stare. The figure smiled, then coughed, water spilling down its chin. I staggered back. My foot caught on a headstone and I went down hard, beam slicing across the cemetery. And that's when I saw them. Every grave was open. Coffins tipped, bones spilling, bodies floating. But none of them were strangers. Every face was mine. Dozens of them, some swollen, some skeletal, some nothing but skulls, grinning with my teeth. All of them gasping, choking, coughing up swamp water that poured back into the ground like a tide. I don't remember running. I just remember headlights and asphalt, the truck bouncing as I hit the road back to town. My knuckles bled where I'd gripped the wheel too tight. Back at the motel, I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Lack of sleep, fever. But the sink was full of black water when I opened the bathroom door. My toothbrush floated in it. The faucet was dry. I left that motel that night and drove into town thinking maybe I could outrun it. I stayed with the crew another week, but everywhere I went, I heard it. In the diner, the man at the counter suddenly doubled over, coughing swamp water into his plate. In the hardware store, a clerk gagged mid-sentence, clutching his throat as algae dripped from his lips. It wasn't just me anymore. The acres was spreading. My last night in Louisiana, I tried to leave. I packed the truck, maps and notes stuffed in the back seat. I drove west, windows down, swamp air hot in my lungs. But no matter which road I took, I kept ending up back at the same stretch of cypress. And there it was. The fence. The acres. The gates were wide open. My headlights swept across the water, and in the beam, a coffin floated toward me. Its lid was gone. Inside, cloth rotted away from bone, but carved on the wood were letters clear as day. My name, and the date carved beneath was tomorrow's. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Behind me, water surged. Not in the swamp, in my lungs. I dropped to my knees, gagging, vomiting black water until I collapsed onto the mud. The cemetery blurred in my vision, and then hands closed around my arms. Dozens of them. Cold, slick, dragging me. Backward. The last thing I saw was the coffin tipping toward me. My reflection floating inside it, eyes open, lips moving, whispering my name. Some cemeteries feel wrong the second you step onto them, not because of ghosts or shadows, but because the ground itself doesn't want you there. That's how it was with Briar Hollow Cemetery in southern West Virginia. From the road, it looked ordinary. Wrought iron gates, rusted orange, grass overgrown, leaning headstones half swallowed by weeds. But once you step past the fence, the earth shifted underfoot. The soil wasn't solid. It moved, sagging with every step, like there was nothing holding it up from below. The first time I went there, it wasn't for curiosity. It was for work. I was with a survey crew, charting subsidence patterns for a coal company that had shut down decades ago. The land had collapsed more than once, whole backyards caving into black shafts, porches tilted into hollows, streams vanishing underground. Briar Hollow sat right on top of that mess. People said that's why no one buried kin there anymore. They didn't trust the graves to stay put. I'd heard stories before. Miners who swore they'd heard knocking in the walls like someone was alive down there. Old women who claimed the ground traded souls, that coffins sank, and sometimes living folks did too. I'd laughed at the stories, chalked them up to mountain superstition, until the day I walked that ground myself. It was late October, the kind of chill where the sun barely breaks through and fog clings low. I parked my truck by the fence, slung my pack, and climbed over. The air inside the cemetery felt heavy, muffled. My boots sank an inch each step. I knelt to mark a coordinate near the oldest stones. They were from the 1800s, names carved deep but weathered pale. As I drove the stake into the soil, the ground gave way an inch, then two. The stake slid down as if the earth were hollow. That's when I felt it. A tremor. Not like wind, not like trucks on the highway. A vibration under my knees, then a sound. Knock. I froze. Knock, knock. It was below me. The soil moved under my hands, subtle, like something shifting in the dark. I yanked the stake back and scrambled to my feet, scanning the graves. One of them sagged. A fresh dip, soil slumped inward, the headstone tilting. And I swear I saw it move again like the ground was chewing. I told myself it was nothing, just the soil settling. But when I turned to leave, I heard the whisper. Down. My throat went dry. I spun, but no one was there. Just fog curling low across the stones. I ran back to my truck, heart hammering. I told myself I'd logged enough for the day. But when I drove off, I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror. The fog behind the fence seemed thicker, like it was spilling out, following me down the road. That night, I couldn't shake it. The knocks. The whisper. I lay awake in my rented room above a bait shop, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the floorboards below sounded like tapping from under the bed. At midnight, I gave in and sat up. My mouth was dry, throat aching. I went to the sink for water. When I twisted the tap, the pipes groaned, and a spray of black dirt sputtered into the glass before the water cleared. I didn't drink it. I dumped the glass and stared at the drain. It gurgled low, then knocked. 2 sharp raps from the pipes. I backed away, pulse racing. The pipes knocked again, slower this time. Then a third time. And then silence. The next day, the company wanted more data. They told me to go back out, deeper into the hollow to check for new sinkholes. I didn't want to, but the job was the job. I parked at the gate again. The fog hadn't lifted, though the sun was up. It lay thick across the stones, swallowing the lower halves of the headstones like a tide. I walked further this time, toward the newer graves at the back. The ground was worse there, sagging like wet sand. Some graves had already collapsed in, headstones tipped sideways into pits. A few coffins were exposed, corners of wood jutting from the soil. I forced myself not to look too close, just marked coordinates, and pressed on. Half an hour in, I found the worst of it. A hole, wide and black, maybe 10 feet across where 3 graves had sunk together. Coffin wood jutted from the sides like broken ribs. The pit dropped straight down into darkness. I crouched, light in hand, and shined it in. The beam cut only a few feet before the dark swallowed it. The air that rose from it was cold, metallic, and wet. I leaned closer, and then I heard it. Knock, from below. I froze, light shaking. Knock, knock. Then a third, slower. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I whispered before I could stop myself. Silence, then a voice, faint, hollow, echoing from below. "Help!" I scrambled back, heart hammering. It came again, clearer this time. "Help me." I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I crept back instead, shaking, and shined the light deeper. That's when I saw it. A face, pale, gray, eyes wide, staring up at me, lips moving slow. "Help me." And then it sank, swallowed by the dark, like the ground itself had pulled it down. I stumbled back, tripped over a stone, and went down hard. Dirt filled my mouth. When I spat, it was black, wet, metallic, like the taste of blood and coal mixed. I bolted for the truck, boots slipping in mud, lungs burning. That night, I couldn't eat. I sat in the dark with my light on, hands shaking. I kept hearing the voice in my head. "Help me. Help me." Around 3 in the morning, I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, and then I dreamed. I was in the pit. The soil closed over me, heavy, pressing. My chest burned, air gone. I clawed upward, fingers breaking nails, dirt filling my throat. Above me, I saw coffins sliding, one after another, faces pressed to glass, mouths moving in silent screams as they fell past me into the dark. I woke gasping, nails bloody, dirt under them. My bed was full of soil. I screamed, stumbling, out, shaking it off. When I turned on the lamp, the bed was clean, the sheets white, no dirt, no blood. But my nails were still torn. I didn't want to go back. I told myself I'd quit, leave the job, leave the state, but the company wanted more. "One last site," they said. "Just one more measurement." So I went. I told myself I'd stay at the edges, not near the pit. I told myself I'd mark one coordinate and leave. But as I stepped inside the cemetery, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not just sag, it rose, then sank, like something beneath was moving. Then I heard it again. Knock, 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 from below every grave, and with each knock, the ground dropped a little more. Soil sagged, coffins shifted, headstones tilted, and then I heard the voices. Not one. Dozens. "Help us, help me. Down here." I stumbled backward, ears ringing. The ground behind me shifted, sagging, and I went down on one knee. My hand plunged into soft soil. When I yanked it free, a hand came up with it. Gray fingers wrapped around my wrist, nails biting into my skin. I screamed and tore loose. The hand slid back into the earth without a trace. I bolted for the gate. The ground sagged with every step, soil shifting, trying to pull me down. I didn't stop until I hit the truck, slammed the door, and peeled out. That night, I didn't dream, but I didn't sleep either. Every sound was a knock, every shadow was a hand. I lay awake until dawn, throat raw, chest heavy, waiting for the ground to give way beneath me. And when the sun rose, I saw dirt on the floor beside my bed. Damp, black, clumped, like it had fallen straight out of the earth. The morning after I found the dirt beside my bed, I packed my bag and swore I was leaving. I told myself I'd drive west, maybe as far as Kentucky, and never look back. I didn't care about the paycheck anymore. I didn't care about the contract or the company. All I cared about was getting as far from Briar Hollow as I could. But when I threw my pack in the truck and turned the ignition, nothing happened. Dead. The dash stayed black. The starter clicked once, and then silence. I tried again, pumping the pedals, swearing under my breath. Still nothing. And then faint under the hood, I heard it. Knock. I froze. Knock. Knock. 3 slow raps like someone was inside the engine block. I bolted out of the truck and stumbled backward, heart slamming. The air was still, the lot empty, and yet I swore I heard whispers rising out of the gravel. Faint. Hollow. Down here. With us. I ran back upstairs, locked the door, and pressed my back against it, breathing hard. I told myself I'd wait until daylight, call a tow, let someone else handle the truck. But the thought nagged me. If the ground wanted me, if it had already marked me, where could I run? By sundown, I knew the answer. Nowhere. That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I sat on the bed, light on, staring at the floor. Midnight. Passed. 1. 2. And then the floor creaked, not like wood settling. It bowed downward under the weight of nothing, sagging toward the center. I backed up, pressing against the wall as the boards dipped, groaning. A hairline crack split between the planks, and from the darkness below came a faint breath of air. Cold, damp. And then the knock. Once, twice, thrice. I screamed and stumbled for the door, wrenching it open. I tore down the stairs, out into the night, lungs burning. My boots slapped gravel as I sprinted for the truck, not caring that it was dead. I just needed to be anywhere but inside that room. That's when the ground moved. The gravel under my feet shifted, sagging like sand in an hourglass. I went down hard on one knee, palms scraping stone. The earth dipped another inch, sucking at my boots. I scrambled free, gasping, and ran blind into the night. Fog swirled around me. The air was bitter, metallic. I knew where I was going before I admitted it to myself. Briar Hollow. The cemetery was waiting. By the time I reached the gate, the fog was so thick I couldn't see the tree line. The iron posts loomed out of it like ribs. I stepped through, chest heaving, and the silence hit me. No crickets, no owls, no wind, just the earth shifting. The ground swelled, sank, swelled again, like breath in slow motion. Headstones tilted, some sinking halfway, others already swallowed. The soil shimmered black with damp, as if the graves were sweating. I walked deeper, drawn against every instinct. Each step sank an inch, the ground softening like mud. My light cut through the fog in weak beams, barely illuminating the path. And then I saw it. The pit. Wider now, at least 20 feet across, edges jagged, where more graves had collapsed. Coffins jutted from the walls like broken teeth. The pit dropped into blackness that swallowed the beam of my light. I crept closer, hands shaking. Cold air rose from it, wet and foul, carrying whispers with it. Help us. Don't leave. Down. The voices layered over each other, dozens, hundreds, all echoing from the hollow below. I fell to my knees, shaking. My light trembled across the dark. That's when I saw movement. A face. No. Faces. Dozens of them, pale and gray, pressed against the walls of the pit. Eyes rolled white, mouths stretched wide, lips moving in silent screams. Some clawed upwards, fingers breaking as the soil pulled them back. Others hung motionless, their bodies caught in half-rotted coffins suspended in the dirt. The ground trembled beneath me. The edge gave way an inch, soil slipping into the pit. I scrambled back, heart racing, but the voices grew louder. Down! Join us! Trade! The ground shuddered harder, splitting. A coffin tipped from the wall, falling into the black below. I didn't hear it hit bottom, then another, and another. Coffins, bones, whole graves tumbling downward into darkness that never ended. The soil under me crumbled. I slid forward, boots scrabbling for purchase, but the edge collapsed, and I fell. Darkness swallowed me. The air screamed past my ears, cold and wet. I flailed, arms reaching for anything, but there was nothing. Just black void. I fell for seconds, then minutes, then forever, until my lungs seized, and my scream broke into a sob. And then I hit. Not hard earth, not stone, wood. The lid of a coffin splintered under me, collapsing into dust and bone. I rolled off, gagging, coughing dirt from my mouth. My light flickered, beam weak, but enough to show me where I was. The pit was no pit. It was endless. Coffins hung in the air around me, wedged into walls of loose soil, suspended in mid-fall. Some dangled open, bodies spilling, mouths still moving. Others slammed shut, muffled pounding echoing inside. And beneath it all, deeper than the eye could follow, was nothing. Just black. I staggered to my feet, light sweeping. A coffin to my left burst open, a gray hand clawing out, fingers bent at impossible angles. A face followed, half skeletal, eye sockets black. Its mouth opened, and a voice rasped out. "Trade." I stumbled back. Another coffin groaned, wood splintering as another corpse pushed free. Its head snapped toward me, jaw cracking wide. "Trade." More lids split, more bodies rising. They weren't crawling upward. They weren't clawing toward the light. They were turning to me. "Trade." The word roared from 100 mouths at once, echoing in the hollow. The walls shook, soil raining down. I screamed and ran, feet slipping in dirt, lungs heaving. But there was nowhere to run. Everywhere I turned, coffins burst, corpses spilling, mouths gaping, eyes rolling white. Their arms reached, fingers snapping like twigs as they grabbed for me. I fell to my knees, sobbing. Please, God, no. And then the ground beneath me shifted. Soil opened, swallowing my hands, my knees, my chest. I thrashed, but it pulled me down, deeper, darker. I gasped, dirt filling my throat, my scream cut off. And then, silence. I woke lying on my back, grass beneath me, the night sky above. I sat up, gasping, dirt falling from my mouth. I was back in the cemetery. The pit loomed behind me, silent still. My light lay on the ground beside me, cracked, but glowing. I staggered to my feet, chest heaving. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, a hallucination, a fever dream. But then I saw it. A grave, freshly dug, soil piled high, a headstone already in place. I stumbled closer, knees weak. The engraving was sharp, letters clear, my name, and beneath it, today's date. I dropped to my knees, sobbing. My breath hitched, chest seizing. And then I coughed. Dirt. Black, wet, clotted dirt poured from my mouth, filling my hands, spilling into the grass. I clawed at my throat, gasping. My vision blurred. The cemetery spun. The last thing I saw was the grave. Its soil sinking, shifting, opening like a mouth, and then I was falling again. I was already running when the path moved. Not cracked, not shifted, moved. Asphalt twisted under my boots like a conveyor belt, dragging me backward even as I pumped my legs forward. My lungs burned, my throat tasted of iron, and every desperate step only pulled me deeper into the cemetery. Behind me, headstones ground against each other with a sound like grinding teeth. The air reeked of wet soil and mold, the sour stink of open graves. I stumbled, caught myself, looked up, and realized the rows had changed again. The exit gate I'd seen just seconds ago was gone. In its place, a wall of mausoleums loomed high, their stone doors yawning open like mouths waiting to close. That was when I understood what everyone meant when they whispered the name Mawfield. This wasn't a burial ground. It was a trap. I hadn't come here for thrills. I'd been cutting through to save time after a late shift. Fairview Memorial Park was lit enough, with tall lamps throwing dim amber light down the paved paths. It looked like every other suburban cemetery, calm, safe. But as soon as I passed the second row of graves, I felt it. The air thickened, not colder, not hotter, just denser, like breathing through wet cloth. My footsteps echoed too loud. The lamps flickered with every inhale. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I even laughed when I saw the same headstone twice. Miriam Lowell, 1903-1972. I figured there must have been two Lowells, maybe a family plot. But then I saw it again. And again. The third time, the date had changed. 1903-1992. The fourth, it read 1903-2012. The fifth time, there was no death date at all. Just a dash, waiting to be filled. That was when the path rippled like something breathing beneath it. Asphalt shuddered under my feet, then slanted, dragging me toward the older part of the grounds. I turned to run the other way, but the path curved mid-stride like it was guiding me. Lamps shifted, their bases sliding inches across the grass, bending the light. The cemetery wasn't just changing, it was rearranging itself around me. Rows of stones closed in, angling toward each other, forming a corridor too narrow to escape. The sound of stone grinding against stone was deafening. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The vibration went straight through bone. I sprinted anyway, hoping I could find a break, but the corridor only funneled me deeper. Deeper, until I slammed into that wall of mausoleums. Their facades were black with lichen, marble doors cracked. As I stumbled closer, one door groaned open on its own, then another, then another. Darkness inside wasn't empty. It pulsed. Something shifted just beyond the reach of the lamplight, like bodies crowding tight, waiting. The smell hit me next, sweet at first, like lilies rotting in stagnant water. Then sharp, sour. The stink of old sweat and soil turned. I gagged and stumbled back. That's when the door nearest me slammed shut. Not a slow swing. It snapped, like jaws clapping together. I turned to run, and the ground buckled. The path arched upward beneath me, cracked, then dipped like a wave. My knees gave out, and I hit hard, palms scraping. Gravel embedded in my skin, warm with something thicker than dew. When I pulled my hand up, it was streaked red. Blood seeped from the asphalt. My scream echoed back wrong. Too many voices, layered, repeating. The walls of headstones tilted inward, leaning so close I could read every inscription. Only they weren't right anymore. Each one had my name carved into it. Not just my name, my birthday too. But the death date changed with every stone. 2018, 2019, 2020. I stumbled past row after row, each predicting a different end. Some next week, some years from now, some already past. And then one stopped me cold. Born 1994, died tonight. The ground heaved, and I dropped to my knees. From the soil around me, grass peeled back, like lips drawing tight. Roots writhed upward, snapping like fingers breaking. They coiled across the asphalt, across the graves, dragging chunks of earth with them. The nearest headstone tilted until it fell, slamming flat. The sound wasn't rock on soil, it was bone snapping. A crack spidered across the slab, and from beneath it, a hand thrust upward. Not skeletal, fresh, fingernails packed with dirt, knuckles popping wet as it clawed the air. I staggered back, tripping over another grave. The grass there quivered, then split. Soil parted like skin, and an entire face pushed through. Eyes shut, mouth opening wide as if sucking breath for the first time. I screamed and scrambled up, but the ground wouldn't let me. My foot sank ankle deep. I yanked, but roots coiled tight around my boot, dragging down. The soil pulsed beneath me, every throb pulling harder like a throat swallowing. I tore free, boot ripping, and stumbled into a clearing ringed by mausoleums. They were closer now, tighter, like they'd moved while I blinked. The doors stood open. Inside, the dark writhed. I forced myself not to look, not to see what shifted. But the whisper came anyway. Not from inside the tombs, from everywhere. Stay. I froze. The word wasn't loud. It was soft, like someone leaning close to my ear, Then it came again, doubled. "Stay with us." The sound crawled down my spine. My knees buckled, and I pressed my hands to my ears, but the whispers burrowed straight through bone. The ground quaked. The mausoleums slammed shut in unison. Stone doors smacked into place like jaws clapping. The echo rolled through the cemetery, shaking loose dust and chips of marble. And then, in the sudden silence, I heard a new sound. Breathing, not mine. The cemetery itself was breathing. Every lamp flickered and died. Darkness swallowed everything. The only light left came from the headstones themselves, glowing faint as if carved from bone. Each inscription pulsed with pale light, and I realized none of them said Lowell or Graham or Perkins anymore. Every stone had my name. Every one. The glowing dates pulsed like heartbeats, faster, brighter, until they all synchronized, until they all spelled the same death date. Tonight. I broke then. Ran blind, slamming into stones, tripping over roots that snapped at my shins like jaws. My throat shredded from screaming, but the cemetery swallowed the sound. The paths looped, twisted, spat me back where I'd started. And then the ground split. Not a crack, a wound. The clearing tore wide open, soil peeling back in slabs, roots dangling like tendons. The graves slumped inward, coffins tumbling into the gap. I looked down and saw no bottom, just black lined with glowing epitaphs. Thousands of headstones carved into the walls of the abyss. Each one my name. The cemetery had opened its mouth, and I was standing on its tongue. I felt it move under me. Grass curled, wrapping around my ankles like fingers. The ground tilted, slow but certain, sliding me toward the pit. I clawed at the soil, fingers breaking nails, blood smearing across dirt that drank it in. My light died in my pocket, crushed under me. The last thing I saw before the ground tilted again was a mausoleum door swinging wide. Inside, the dark seethed. Something vast shifted, bones grinding like gears, eyes opening like lanterns in the black. The cemetery wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was alive. And I was inside its mouth. The ground tilted again, and I slid forward, gravel and dirt cutting my palms as I scrambled for purchase. Grass curled around my fingers like wet tongues, tugging me down the slope toward the open pit. The cemetery's mouth yawned wider, rows of graves collapsing inward, coffins cracking like eggshells as they tumbled into the dark. I screamed until my throat shredded, but the sound didn't leave the clearing. The air was too thick, dense with the smell of soil, and lilies turned sour. My own voice bounced back at me, layered and distorted, dozens of versions of myself shrieking from every headstone. "Stay." The whisper surged up from the pit, so close it rattled my teeth. It wasn't one voice. It was thousands, all speaking at once, every dead throat in Mawfield, begging, commanding, demanding. I dug my hands into the soil, tearing fistfuls of grass, but the ground pulsed like flesh under me. Roots snaked around my wrists, tightening until I thought my bones would snap. I kicked, thrashed, pulled, but each struggle only drew me closer to the edge. The abyss gaped below, lined with glowing epitaphs carved into the soil itself. Each one bore my name. Each one flickered with the same date. Tonight. I went over the lip. For a moment I was weightless, tumbling through black air that smelled of rot and damp stone. My scream echoed down the walls, swallowed by the chorus of whispers. Then I hit something soft that gave way beneath me, and I sank chest deep into it before I realized it wasn't soil, it was bodies. A mound of corpses, fresh and ancient, packed together like clay. Their skin was slick with rot, their bones sharp where they jutted through. Hands pawed at me, not grabbing to escape, but holding me in place, pressing me deeper into their mass. "Trade," one croaked, in a voice that hissed through broken teeth. I shoved, clawed, kicked, but there was no end to them. Each time I freed an arm, another hand wrapped it. Each time I pulled my leg loose, a dozen fingers clutched my calf. Their eyes glowed faint, like embers smoldering in wet sockets, and every one of them fixed on me. Trade. The word rolled through them all, an avalanche of sound. Above me, the walls of the pit rippled. Headstones melted into new shapes, inscriptions squirming like worms across the granite. Some stones cracked open, revealing hollow mouths that screamed silently. Others sprouted roots like veins, reaching downward, weaving themselves into the mass of bodies beneath me. The cemetery was feeding itself. I could see it. Coffins dropping like offerings, bones crushed into powder, marrow sucked into the soil. The ground convulsed as if digesting, headstones glowing brighter each time something was swallowed. And then, in the chaos, I saw movement higher up. People, not corpses. Living people, stumbling along paths that shifted under their feet. Their faces were pale with terror, mouths open in screams I couldn't hear through the thick air. The cemetery had opened its gates again. It had lured more prey inside. I tried to shout, to warn them, but dirt clogged my throat. All I could do was watch as the ground tilted and dragged them forward, toward the pit. Some clawed at trees that pulled up roots and slithered away. Others threw themselves against mausoleum doors that snapped shut like jaws. One man vaulted a headstone, only to vanish as the earth yawned beneath him and swallowed him whole. The pit welcomed them all. Bodies rained down, screaming, flailing, landing among the corpses that caught them like nets. Some were pulled under immediately, their limbs vanishing in seconds. Others fought, clawed their way halfway up the wall before roots pierced their chests and yanked them down. Every death lit the epitaphs brighter. Every scream fueled the whisper. Stay, stay, stay. I thought I'd go mad. My chest heaved, lungs clawing for air that wasn't there. I thrashed against the mass of bodies until my arms went numb. My nails split, my skin tore, and still I was sinking. Then I saw it. Across the pit, beyond the writhing corpses and glowing stones, a figure stood on solid ground. A man. He wore my clothes, my jacket, my boots, my torn shirt. His face was my face, pale and slack, but his eyes glowed with the same faint light as the epitaphs. He raised one hand, palm outward, and the bodies holding me froze. The whispers cut off. Silence pressed against my ears until they rang. The double tilted his head, studying me. Then he pointed to a headstone carved into the wall above us. The letters blazed so bright they hurt my eyes. Born 1994, died tonight. My headstone. The bodies surged again, but not to drag me under, to lift me. Hands shoved against my back, my arms, my legs, raising me higher. The pit wall loomed, epitaphs flashing like lightning. The double's eyes followed me as I rose, my body carried like an offering. When I reached the ledge, the ground itself tilted, spitting me back onto the grass. I scrambled to my knees, coughing dirt, blood streaming from my nose. The cemetery lay silent. The mausoleums were closed. The headstones stood straight. The lamps flickered steady. It looked normal again. Almost. Because when I staggered to my feet and turned toward the gate, I saw a fresh grave waiting by the path. Soil piled neat, headstone gleaming. I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it said. My name. Tonight's date. I ran. I don't remember how I found the gate, but it was open, yawning wide like it wanted me to leave. I bolted through, sprinted across the street, and didn't stop until the cemetery lights vanished behind me. I thought I'd escaped, but when I stumbled into my apartment and collapsed on the floor, I smelled it. Soil. Fresh turned, wet, clinging to my clothes, packed under my nails. My lungs rattled with every breath, clogged with dust that wasn't there. I crawled to the bathroom, gagging, and spat into the sink. Dirt. Black, clotted dirt poured from my mouth, thick with the stink of rot. I wiped my lips, trembling, and raised my eyes to the mirror. My reflection smiled, and behind it, I saw rows of headstones glowing in the glass. All of them bore my name. All of them whispered in unison, "You never left."